All right, welcome to our video this time. What's new in Xojo 2016 Release 4? I am Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. So technically, the current release is actually Xojo 2016 Release 4.1. I'll kind of mix the terms Release 4 and 4.1 together, but the 4.1 is the current one you'll get off the website. There were over 170 changes, and this was actually released in December, so December 2016. We put Release 4 out, and the following week we put Release 4.1 out because we had some Windows things that were identified by people once it went out into a broader usage, essentially out of beta. So we quickly turned around a few things that were deemed important. And as I mentioned, this release had a lot of changes related to Microsoft Windows. It also had some changes to the IDE itself. A couple things on web we're going to talk about. And I think I'm probably just going to focus on these three areas right now. So we'll talk about these very briefly. Then we'll jump into Xojo, take a look at any of them, and then we should have plenty of time to take any questions you have about this or anything else. So let's talk about Windows. Well, you may remember that early last year in 2016, we added high DPI support for Mac OS. And we also added it for Windows in a beta form. And with this release, we feel we've completed the high DPI support for Windows. So the Windows high DPI support is no longer in beta. So that's a pretty big feature. This particular thing has been going on for quite a long time. Took quite a bit of work to get to this point, but essentially it works the same way it does for your OS X apps. There's just a little switch you got to flip on your shared app settings, and then your app will be built for high DPI, and it'll look super sharp on high DPI Windows installations. Part of what was needed to be able to enable high DPI on Windows was we had to update the graphics subsystem on Windows that Xojo uses on Windows. There's really nothing that you have to do on your apps to take advantage of this. It's just essentially Xojo is now calling through to some new graphics layers, in particular Direct 2D and Direct Write. And the cool thing about these graphics layers is they're hardware accelerated. So on actual Windows hardware that has, graphics cards, so anything that's, reasonably modern, you're going to be able to have the operating system take advantage of the hardware when it's doing drawing in your Xojo apps. So this can result in some nice speed ups and was pretty necessary because, as you may or may not be aware, with high DPI, you're essentially, you're greatly increasing the number of pixels that have to be drawn and displayed and whatnot. So you need to be able to get that stuff out to the screen a lot faster. And that's what these two things help with. Now, if you are running Windows in a virtual machine, you're going to want to check some settings. I've been told that Parallels works pretty darn well. I don't actually use Parallels, so I can't verify that. It has good emulation layers for Direct 2D and Direct Write, so that things run perfectly fine. VMware Fusion is not so great. There's a setting in VMware Fusion that lets you enable 3D graphics acceleration. And on my VMware Fusion setup, which is the current version 8.1, I actually had to disable that in order for Xojo to work properly. With it enabled, everything was super, super slow. And my Google research seemed to indicate that that's kind of an issue with the VMware 3D graphics drivers. So just a little tip there, you might want to, if you're using VMware Fusion, turn off any 3D acceleration on any VMs you use with Xojo. Another tweak we made to Windows in this release is regarding the Windows Universal Runtimes. Again, earlier this year, we added the dependency that Xojo apps require these Universal Runtimes to be installed on the Windows machine. And they are typically installed on versions of Windows that are kept up to date and Windows 10. But some older machines or machines that don't always have all their Windows updates run do not have these runtime DLLs installed, so they need to be installed along with your app. So we added a setting to the IDE that will, when you build your Windows app, will just copy these DLLs right alongside your app in the build folder. So that'll make it a little bit easier for you to get to those DLLs. They are included in the Xojo installation itself, as is the installer you can use. But this allows you to just get the files copied right there alongside your app. So, in case you need to do a quick distribution, you zip it up or something, everything will be in one place. Might also make your installer scripts a little easier because it can just go to one location to find all the files it needs. All right, this last thing isn't really Windows specific. It's generally, it's just a high DPI thing. But you can now, in your projects, you can right click on a picture that has been added and convert it to an image set. And it'll take that picture and put it in the 1x slot in the image set. And that can be helpful when you're upgrading your apps to use high DPI, because you can convert your pictures to an image set, and then you can add in the 2x, the corresponding 2x assets for your images, so that everything will look much sharper when it's built for high DPI. On the IDE side, there was an improvement to a feature that we'll look at in a bit. Maybe you have used or maybe weren't aware was there, is called convert to method. And it lets you essentially select a block of code, and it converts that code into a method, sticks it into a method for you. You can specify all the name and the parameters and stuff like that. And then it includes a method. It removes the code that you selected and includes a call to the method. So it makes it a nice way to simplify your code for refactoring and stuff like that. There's also a convert to constant window that takes a text selection and converts it to a constant. That's actually been there in the past. There was a slight tweak to it for this release. Navigator filtering has been added. So if you happen to use the filtering on the Navigator, you can now filter by type of project item, essentially. And you can use it something like this. So you have your search term. So that would be, like you see here, ID. Say find all the things in the project that have a property that contains ID. And this type of filter here would show all the properties and constants in the project, and you can see it's using the wildcard % at the beginning so that it shows both computed properties and regular properties. Lastly, a fair amount of work was done to the tab handling to make this a lot more reliable. You could always open up project items in their own tabs, but sometimes in the past you may have noticed that those project items sometimes reverted back to something else, or went back to the main Navigator list instead of the item you were working on. Well, that's all been cleaned up a bit, and it's much more reliable. And in conjunction with that, the back and forward buttons on the toolbar have been improved so that they also are much more reliable and actually will go back to what you were working on when you press back, as opposed to sometimes appearing to jump to random things almost. And the last IDE item that was added in this release, and this is, we're kind of calling this a beta at this point, is give people time to test it out in case we need to make any changes to it, is our IDE Communication 2.0 protocol. And this is a way for your own apps to communicate with the Xojo IDE and send it commands, essentially send it IDE scripting commands that it then runs. And this particular thing is very useful if you're coding up any sort of build automation for your projects. You can have a separate app. For example, in our case here at Xojo, we have some console type apps that run to build things up, and they can call off to the Xojo IDE using the IDE Communicator to tell it to kick off builds and things like that. All right, and the last few things I wanted to mention here before we look into Xojo are some web-related stuff, and just a couple here. Web container got a couple additional properties for how the scroll bar can be set to appear. You can now set the scroll bar to appear vertical or horizontal. Previously, it was really more automatic. So if the container was larger than the area on the web page, scroll bars would appear. And if it was smaller, they wouldn't appear. But now you can specifically say, hey, I only want to see one of the types of scroll bars. And WebList Box also had a cell picture method added to it that allows you to add a picture into any particular cell in the list box. So for example, you would just write code like this, cell picture, and then the row column, and then assign the picture that you want displayed there. And of course, related to web is Xojo Cloud. And one thing that we did in this release is we improved the time it takes to upload or essentially deploy your apps to Xojo Cloud. What we did is when you do subsequent uploads, we do not resend the libs. And if you've ever looked at your Xojo projects, you've noticed that libs folder, has a fair amount of stuff in it, and it doesn't generally change between builds. So the Xojo Cloud deploy process now checks that to see if anything has changed, and if it hasn't, it decides, well, I'm not going to bother uploading this again. That's a waste of time. So it just uploads the stuff that was newly built, which decreases the amount of time necessary to deploy to Xojo Cloud. All right, so let's switch over to Xojo and look at a couple of these things more closely. All right, so I'm going to start with I guess I might end up working in reverse order, but I'm going to start with the web stuff first because it's only a couple here I really need to show. So I have here a container control, and it has a list box on it. You can see it's pretty big. And I put it on a web page, but I made it smaller so that normally this would end up with scroll bars for horizontal and vertical scroll bars to move around in the list box. So what I did here is I have just told it only show me the vertical scroll bars. In conjunction to this, I also have the list box showing some pictures. And I just quickly threw up 50 rows in there. And you can see the cell picture calls pretty much like I showed earlier. You just call the method with the row column and assign it a picture. And here I have an image set up with the two types of pictures, a 1x and a 2x. And that's it. So you can see here the picture showed in the first column where I stuck it. And I've now got this is the container scroll bar. It's actually different than the list box scroll bar, which is hidden because I didn't put a horizontal scroll bar here. But it's just to show you how you can do that for the different types of things you're setting up. As a lot of people do use containers for creating slick web UIs, and this gives you a little bit more flexibility on how that content can be displayed. All right, we're going to open up Eddie's Electronics here to show some of the IDE things. So, as I mentioned, you can always open up things in new tabs. And you can see when you do that, there's a little lock item here that indicates this tab is locked, and it means it's locked to the item that I opened it up at. And you can see there's no longer any controls that let you move away from that. If I go back to the main tab, there's controls up here that would let me jump around. If I were, if I double clicked something, I could go back, that sort of thing. Well, these things are all missing from here, so it stays locked to the particular page. I can, click around at stuff, maybe look at some code, use the back button to go back to what I was working on. That all works kind of like how you would think it would work, but it's always been a little bit flaky in earlier versions of Xojo, so it's good to see that is now working more reliably. Hopefully you'll get people to continue to use tabs more on their larger projects. You can also unlock a tab, and then that opens up the little navigator thing back over here, so you can change something if you needed to. So if you were truly done with search window, you could certainly just close it and open something else in a new tab, or you could just unlock the tab, find something else you wanted, and then lock it. So either way works. I often find I tend to just close the tab and then come back to kind of the first tab and open up the next thing I want in another tab, but either way seems to work fine, and you can do what is a good workflow for you. The other thing you can do here in the filter is, let's see, we can, you could always filter things by typing their name and getting back a list of things. But the new type filter field essentially allows you to restrict what's being shown based on a particular type of project item. So here it's showing, I did a search, not really a search, but a filter on the entire project, and it's showing me the two things that have ID and are properties. And you can clear the filter to go back to what you want. There's a few more things that this can do that I will show you where they are in the docs. So that's in the user guide and in the Navigator section. And there's a few other examples here you can refer to. So if you happen to make use of the filter, that can be even more useful for figuring out what you want. All right, and then let's look at the extract stuff. Now let's find something that's got some code. So say right here, I decide I want to move a chunk of this code into a method. I can just select it. Well, select the right part. Get it up here. And you can see there's several things that show up here that are essentially used for refactoring. There's various wrap things. Those have been there for a while. In particular, the if, false, and if one is pretty handy. That's essentially equivalent to like commenting out your code, except since it puts it in an if false, a pound if false block, it won't get included in your build. So it doesn't remove the syntax formatting that commenting out your code does. So that can be handy. But convert to method is the one I want to look at now. And you can see this shows you a little window here. And you can, come up with a method name. I could enter parameters that I wanted. I could put a return type, scope, all that stuff. And then when I hit OK, you can see it replaced all the code I had selected with just the call to the method. And then the method is now over here with that code embedded in it. Obviously, you could easily do this yourself, with a little bit of, copy pasting, but it's a little bit slicker, a little bit easier. You don't necessarily forget having to go back and put the method name in, that sort of thing. So hopefully that can help you be a little bit more productive when you are working on your apps. And the last one I wanted to show is the constant. So you can select text, generally you'd select a string or something, and you can pick convert to constant. And then give it a name. And it does the same sort of thing, replaces it with the constant name, and then you get constant added to your project item. All right. Before I move on to the IDE communication thing, let me just check in here. Edwin has a note, since I'm in the IDE section, about page panel. And he is noting that the page panel is now displayed as transparent in the IDE on your layouts, which makes it easier to see the stuff that's on it. So that's kind of cool. Little tweaks like that hopefully continue to make Xojo fast and easy for you to make your apps. All right, and let's look at the IDE Communicator project now. So included with Xojo are 2 projects for IDE Communicator. You can, of course, get to all the examples in the examples folder. The IDE stuff is in the advanced folder. IDE scripting, and then IDE Communicator. And we have examples for the old examples for the V1 protocol are still there, and then we've added a couple for the V2 protocol. I'm looking here at the tester. The other one is a console project that you can run from a command line. I like the tester because it's kind of easier to test with. So what we have here is just a big window that'll let you type essentially an IDE script, and then it'll send it off to Xojo to run. So let's try this. This uses, behind the scenes, it's using IPC sockets to send things back and forth. All right, so I have, I move stuff so you can see. So I click the button, I should be able to connect to Xojo there, and you can see the output says it connected. And I now have a simple script that's right here, and I can click send, and you saw the little saving window pop up there as I sent the command that said save the project, and then next command said print done. Now normally in an IDE script that would cause a dialog to appear, but when you're going through this particular protocol, the dialog's not going to appear. It's just going to be sent back as output. And what is sent back is the is JSON with the output from your commands. So in this particular case, I'm getting back the response of done. And of course, you could print out whatever you wanted, depending on what happened. You know, if you happen to have really powerful IDE scripts, you can hook them up so that you can call them from outside of Xojo, you know, from more of an automated build process type of thing. You know, you can kick off builds, that sort of stuff. I'll point out where this stuff is more fully documented as well. And if you're looking for great details on how to use IDE Communicator in your projects for build scripts, soon to be available are the recordings from XDC. And at XDC 2016, last October, Greg did a great session on how we here at Xojo use IDE Communicator and how we do our automated builds. And that would be a keen one to refer to. So you can see here on the IDE Communicator page, there's a section on version 2 that covers how you can kind of do this. This is some of the low-level stuff. You don't really need to worry about this if you start with just one of the example projects and kind of go from there. But you can get back, you know, errors if you get a script error or some other error that can't happen, and your build automation stuff is able to, you know, get this JSON back, and then it can process it to do what it wants, you know, handle errors or whatnot. In our case, we have, you know, if we have build errors or something like that, we actually have they used to be emails that went out, but now they things that get posted to our Slack channel with the details on the error for the engineers to look into. All right, and that's IDE script. And the last thing I want to point out, actually not the last thing, I want to also point out, whoops, not there, while I'm here, I want to also point out the full release notes for R4 and 4.1 are, of course, included in your Xojo downloads. But you can also review them online right here in the Dev Center. Big long list. You can scroll through. You can click the feedback numbers. It'll jump into feedback, give you the case, and might be additional information in there if you're curious. And then 4.1 gives you the minor ones that were tweaked after the fact. The one other thing I wanted to show, and just point out where it is on the Windows side. So first of all, on shared is where the high DPI setting is here. You can turn that on or off. That's where it's always available. But on Windows, if you click on the Windows build settings, there's the new setting right here, include Windows Runtime DLLs. And this is the one that you can turn on to have all the DLLs that are needed for the Windows Universal Runtime to be included right alongside your built app. Should you want them, of course. And let me check Q&A thing here. Well, I think that's the last, that is truly the last thing I wanted to point out here. So I'm going to switch back to all right, so now got time for some open Q&A. I see Edwin has a little note regarding the Navigator filter to point out that it is not case sensitive. So 2016 release 4, that's the most up-to-date, or release 4.1, most up-to-date version of Xojo. You can grab it at xojo.com, of course. If you have a current license, it's free. Download, play with it. If you don't have a current license, you can still download it and try it out. Just can't build with it, but you can still try it out, see if the new stuff is to your liking, and test it out before you decide to renew. Thanks everyone for attending. Have a great day.